We've got most everybody coming back in. I'm looking for the visuals across the top. I hate to keep moving if we miss anybody, but it looks like most everybody is back. So here's my ask. As you're thinking about and as you were talking through, I'd like for some of you to share. You don't have to tell us who the person is, but tell us about those behaviors or those characteristics. You're welcome to unmute your line if that works for you, or you can chat in, your choice. So tell us, what are some of those characteristics of people who influence you?
This is Mike. We had a good conversation.
Hey, Mike.
Breakout group 1. Hey, how are you?
Good.
Some of the notes that I took, and I think we are all kind of dancing around the same topics or same subjects, but some of the words that stuck out: inclusive, fair, someone who doesn't cut corners, direct or efficient in their communication style, and that they're making decisions that are aligned with a vision or like a clear or apparent strategy.
Nice. Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Mike. Who else has some words or phrases?
So we had a few people who specifically were like pulling towards family members. So those are the people that we like trust and respect.
Sure.
And keep us grounded as well. So always have known like our path in general and know kind of what's best for us. But also, you know, we might not agree with them on everything, but they still have our backs. As well as in a more professional sense, the people who are looking out for the stakeholders. So people who know how to discuss with other people different things that you might not be able to put into words as well as they might.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Becca. I appreciate you sharing. Anything else that strikes you all? Words that you haven't yet heard used to describe that behavior or those characteristics?
Hey, Amanda, it's Nicole.
Hi, Nicole.
A word that came up a lot in our breakout session was mentor. So a lot of people refer to current or former managers or just people who, you know, have the same career path as them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. That is a really nice variety of characteristics of behaviors of people and the roles that they're in. Now, just quick show of hands. I'm going to try and flip through the visuals very quickly. Show of hands if the person you thought of that influences you is in a formal leadership role above you. So hands if that person is in a formal leadership role above you. A little bit less than half. So as I'm scrolling, I usually get 2 thumbnails, and usually one person has it, not usually both, so about half. So with that in mind, do you think that to have influence, the person has to have a leader authority over you? Yes or no? You see some people shaking their heads. No?
If I could say something, you could be looking at someone from afar, right? Like it could be someone who might be in the company that you know, but you never really deal with, but you know about what they do. Or it could even be somebody that's a public figure. You could be just identifying with that person.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Javier. I agree. I don't think that influence has to come with a title. And I think that's really good for all of us to remember. To your point, we might be watching somebody and they don't realize we are. And that influence can spread and that influence can be there without them even knowing. So what I want to make sure we know is there are a variety of ways that people can influence us, good or bad, right? But it does not require that they be in a leadership role. So even if you don't have people that report to you or you're responsible for, you have a way and have the ability to influence others. Some of the things we'll talk about today will help you do that in a positive way. All right, Kathy, let's go ahead and head to our next slide, which is a quote exactly about what we're talking about. The key to successful leadership is influence, not authority. I also think, and I thought it was in here, I'm so disappointed it's not, there was a quote, I believe it was from Dwight D. Eisenhower, about you don't have to hit people over the head. That's abuse, not authority or not influence. So I think we just have to know that the key to our leadership is simply influence. And we can do that without a title. So let's jump now to the next slide, because what you also may have noticed is there was a variety of descriptions of what that influence looks like or sounds like. There's also a variety of different styles of influence. So some of you mentioned making decisions and aligning and moving people forward. Other people might see someone who influences them as sitting back a little bit more or allowing others to take the forefront. What we know from the research is there are a variety of situations that dictate what type of influence we might use or should use. So on the slide, we have 5 different types of influence. We have asserting. This is when somebody insists that their ideas are heard and they challenge anyone who may disagree with them or have a differing opinion. Asserting can be positive. It can also be taken or felt as a negative type of influence. The second one is convincing, and that's where we really put our ideas out there, but we don't necessarily push them as hard. We offer rationale, we offer reasoning behind the reason why we want people to jump on board with us. The next one is negotiating. I might look at and make a compromise and say, well, if we did this on this side to make me happy, we could do that on the other side to make you happy. And there are situations where negotiation might be the style to use. Bridging is really about making sure that you are honoring, and almost in the forefront is the relationship. You may want to assert more strongly, but you really feel like you're going to get further and influence people by listening. And many of you said that listening was one of the influential behaviors. The last one is inspiring. And this is almost mostly the hands-off way to influence. And that's simply by advocating your position and encouraging others with a shared sense of purpose to come along with you and getting them excited about what might happen if we go in the direction that you want, and really appealing more so to the emotion. I want you to think about these styles of influence and then either unmute your line or you can chat in. What's a situation that you think you might need to use the asserting style? Be more authoritative, be more assertive or strong in a situation. What's a situation, especially in your day-to-day work, that might require somebody be more assertive in their influence style? Any sort of construction? Yes. Construction emergencies. Yes. That's a really good example. Thank you, Angela. Safety of others is huge. That's when we assert. Yes. Thank you, Mark. Safety. If you're we call them at Farmers red hats, and those are the people with the clipboard and the whistle, and they're marking off people who are out at the fire evacuation posts, and they are the people that have to be assertive. Absolutely. What do you think might be a situation where you would be more convincing versus assertive? What do you think might happen there? So maybe, yeah, new policies, we might have to give reasons why we're going away from the old policy, because some people live in old policies and they really need to be convinced with really strong rationale to move forward to a different direction. Maybe goal setting. Yep. Dealing with homeowners or contractors, quite possibly. Very often you're having to maybe even deliver something they don't want to hear. So being able to influence them and convince them to do something might be helpful too. So maybe even, so Andrea, I missed for the first one, the asserting for a child, a friend, or a stranger. Might need to assert, absolutely, thank you. Let's go ahead and move to the next one. This is negotiating. Whoops, sorry, Kathy, just the next style. Negotiating, when might you use that? When do you think you would use the negotiating style versus, so salary? Absolutely. I remember saying to one of our adult children that they should have a conversation and negotiate their salary, and they looked at me like I had 3 heads. I said, it's a thing, people do it. So maybe the trades or the contractors, yeah, you bet. Service contracts, yeah, you might need to negotiate a win-win situation, absolutely. Teams for scheduling, sure, sure. Let's talk a little bit more about bridging or inspiring, because these are really more on the empathetic or feeling or people side. When might you use either one of those? Getting feedback. Yes, you bet. Feedback for some folks is really difficult to hear. And if we don't somehow appeal to that emotion, we might lose them. When allies are necessary to get something greater done, absolutely. Perhaps municipalities, you bet. You bet, because they have very limited spend very often. So we're having to try and inspire them to spend with us or with you all, the funders, absolutely. Maybe even educating in a procedure, you bet. So what if, I'm telling you there's 5 different kinds of influence. What if you chose to use only one? What might happen if you just had a go-to and you always used that style of influence? Had a math teacher like this back in the day. What might happen? Not effective? Probably not. Why so? Why wouldn't it be effective? It might cause conflict. We know we're all different, right? We all communicate a little bit differently.
Everyone's not going to respond to the same type of style of influence.
Yes, ding, ding, ding. Thank you. You're absolutely right. We're so different in how we communicate out and how we receive communication that one style just might not cut it. So while we might really need that asserting style, the building is on fire. If we're trying to inspire people to get out of the building, that's not going to work well for a lot of people. Yet, if we're trying to get people to buy in on their emotion and we're pushing them and kind of asserting too strongly, we may not get them to come over. So if you look at these styles, usually we have a go-to. It may not be the only one that we use, but we usually have a go-to that we use more often than others. And I would just ask you to consider that sometimes you might need to consider using a different style. We'll talk a little bit in a couple of minutes about our audience and how knowing the audience who's going to receive our message might be helpful in knowing. This will be helpful too once you determine who that audience is. Think about what is it that you need them to do. Do you need them to move quickly with no question? You might use an asserting style. If you want to inspire them and really get their heart pounding and buying in, that might be more on the bridging or inspiring. It's very rare that people have no clue about the styles. And it's very rare that they're good about switching between the styles unless they have some modicum of emotional intelligence. So let's go ahead and go to that slide, Kathy. So emotional intelligence and influence absolutely go hand in hand. Now, speaking of hands, quick show of hands, how many of you are even just remotely familiar with emotional intelligence and kind of the concept? Okay, I see a couple of hands going up. good. Again, just a little less than half maybe. So I'll keep this really high level, but I am providing you some information and some tools that you can use on the back end to help you dig into this a little bit more. So keep it high level today just for the time that we have, but you'll have some options for digging in a little bit later. So the overall concept of emotional intelligence is really being aware of not only what I'm doing and feeling, but also being able to be aware of those people around me, and then somehow managing that, whether I'm managing my own emotion or trying to manage or mitigate emotion that's coming from someone else. So we break it down into the 4 quadrants. On the very top, we have self-awareness and self-management. On the bottom, we have social awareness and relationship management. So the top is all about us. Self-awareness is, I know what triggers me. I know I can feel that emotion bubbling when somebody makes me mad or happy or sad. And I can feel it coming. I know the impact it has on the people around me and my work. I might know, you know what, that person made me mad. I need to get up from my desk or away from the situation so I can cool down because I won't be able to focus on my work. That's being really self-aware. The self-management piece is not only being aware, but being able to almost stop it in the moment or manage it really quickly and know that if I don't manage it, then I'm impacting what's down on the bottom, which is that other people piece. So the self-management, people who are really good at this resist impulse. If you have that one friend who just can bite their tongue or take a breath, turn around, walk away, come back, and they're fine, those are usually people who are really good at self-management. Some of us are not. I will tell you, it is a work in progress for me. I am aware of what triggers me. For the most part, I can manage that, but that is one area I continue to work on, especially in times of stress, especially in times of heartache. That's really tough. So we all have that. Some of us are a little bit better than others. Here's the good news though too. There is work you can do. Regardless of where you feel as though you are, there are ways you can get better at all of this. So on the bottom, it's about reading the room. It's about being aware of what's going on around you, reading body language, reading facial expressions, reading context in a message that's given to you. Being socially aware allows you to be a really good team player. You can read what's going on with your team. We were on a call a number of weeks ago, and somebody who is normally really vivacious and really happy and upbeat was not. And so being able to read those body cues, being able to read the mood or the tone, that's really important to then being able to influence beyond yourself. That relationship management piece is about the actions that you're able to take. Maybe you have the ability to diffuse a room that's high with tension, or you have the ability to connect people who maybe have had a contentious relationship, and you find the good in both and help them connect. So there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the high level of what emotional intelligence is about. As I mentioned, we are going to share with you 2 resources after the fact that will not only help you kind of self-assess where do you land in each of these quadrants, but then also give you some ideas about how do you develop in any quadrant where you feel like you have some room. So awesome. All right, so quick recap of our styles of influence and our emotional intelligence is on our next slide. And that just reminds you that we have all of that variety of ways that we can influence each other and other people based on what is it that we need to get done. We might select one style or another. And at the very same time, we're trying to be aware of what's triggering us, what is the impact to others, and how can I manage not only myself, but then other people. When you build effective messages, you eliminate some of the hassle of having to do that figuring out in the moment. And that's that preparation that some of you talked about early when we talked about effective communication. It's being prepared or being able to get prepared really quickly. All right, so what questions do you have for me about the styles or about the emotional intelligence that we can answer for you now, knowing you're going to get a little bit more information about that? So I'm watching the chat and your faces. So thumbs up if you're good to go. That'll give me a little bit of a visual. Thank you. Awesome. All right, good. I don't see any questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and move to our second topic, which is our B, which is build and deliver effective messages. Now, all of the styles of influence and emotional behavior behind this, now we can start thinking about building our message. We have 3 words that really come to mind when I think about effective messages. Effective messages are appropriate to the audience. So the way I would talk to the head of St. Bernard Project wouldn't be entirely different, but I might use different terminology or a different level of detail than if I'm talking to maybe one of the AmeriCorps volunteers. It's not that we would be less respectful, it's just simply what is needed for the head of might be very, very different than somebody who's going to be doing the work. So it has to be appropriate to the audience that we're going to deliver that message to. It also has to be useful. When people walk away from your message, they have to know, what did you just share with them? They have to be able to remember it, and it has to be useful to their purpose. And last, it has to be engaging. You want to keep people engaged. You want to keep them interested in what you're saying. If you don't, you lose them. They don't get the information you're giving, or they don't take the action that you're asking for. So those 3 things need to be in an effective message. We can do that by using the tools I'm going to give you. So let's go ahead and go to the next screen. I think you all will find this a very relevant metaphor or analogy. When we look at building and crafting messages, I think about them in terms of building a house. So you buy your plot of land, you hire the architect, and they start drawing up the blueprint. And you look at the blueprint and you say, yeah, that's not going to work. I've got kids coming in from the garage, or I have my elderly parents who have to be near a bathroom, or whatever the case is. You can move things around and make sure that whoever's going to use that particular blueprint is appropriate for the people who will use it. We're going to use what's called the communication blueprint in our process today to make sure that any message that we build is appropriate to the audience. We also then look at the structure of the build, and we want to make sure that as we're framing the walls in a house, that we can use those walls, use those hallways, use the stairways, and that they're solid and provide a really nice framework or structure for our message. We're going to use the communication outline to do that, and we'll see these in just a moment. The last thing we do with a house when we build it is we put on those nice to haves, the carpet, the paint, the drapes, the pretty shutters, the shrubbery, etc. We're going to call those our attention grabbers, our calls to action, and our activities. Those are ways that we make our message engaging. We don't have to do all of them, but we have to insert them very intentionally to make sure that we keep people engaged. So appropriate, useful, and engaging, just like we build a house, we have to have an outline or a blueprint, a structure, outline, and then we also have to have some things that engage us. So let's start with the blueprint. Kathy, that would be our next slide. And this is a document that you all will have that you can fill out. Now, rest assured, it will take me longer to describe this document than it will take you to actually do it. And the more you build messages in this order or in this sequence, the more this is going to become really natural and just a thought process versus something you have to write down. There is a statement at the very beginning. It says, determine the objective. There are 3 questions you're going to ask yourself. My objective is to, First question, is my objective to inform people, just give them an FYI, or is it to persuade them to do something? Maybe you're asking them to change a procedure or a process. So that's the first question, inform or persuade. Second question is, who's your audience? Is it the head of? Is it your leaders? Is it your AmeriCorps volunteers? Is it staff members? Who's your audience? Try and get as specific as possible. And then that blank line down below is actually you filling in what is it that you want to either inform or persuade them about or to do. So an objective statement might sound like this. My objective is to persuade our brand new AmeriCorps volunteers to finish their safety training within the first month. So that might be a requirement. So forgive me if I have that completely off base, but that's the statement. What is my objective to inform or persuade? Who am I doing that with? And what is it that I'm asking them to do or do differently? I asked you to get specific about that audience because there's a second piece to the blueprint, and that's really think about who your audience is. What do they know about the topic you're talking about? If they don't know a lot, you might have to include some more details. If they don't know a lot, but they don't need to know a lot, don't include the details. If it's the difference between your leadership team and the volunteers, speak in the language of your leadership team if you're talking to them. Speak in the language of your volunteers if you're talking to them. You might use acronyms with your leadership team that you might or might not use with your volunteers or your staff. So really asking yourself, who are they? How familiar are they with my topic, the thing I'm asking them about or telling them? And how do they feel about it? If you're asking them to make a change that they don't want to make, you're going to have to change your language slightly to acknowledge the fact that they don't want to change. And you're going to have to assert your influence potentially in either the asserting style or the convincing, if it's the way things are going to be going forward. So that's another place where you're going to decide what type of influence do I need to use here to get people on board to do what we need to. Like I said, it took me longer to explain it than it actually will for you to fill it out. But I want you to start thinking about any message that you'll deliver. What is my objective? What is the purpose? And if you cannot answer that question, go back to the person who asked you to deliver the message, or go back to your boss. Hey, what's the purpose of us doing this? Or what's the objective? That will help. All right, let's go to the next slide, Kathy. All right, so this is a very high level of what we call the communication outline. There are 3 parts. Anybody notice anything consistent in just the 52 minutes we've been together? Anything you've heard me say 9,703 times? There's this magic about the number 3. Something about it, the brain is able to process things that come in 3. So we've been talking through this. I've structured every bit of our conversation today in buckets of 3. Easier to remember, easier to stick to. All right, so the communication outline, 3 pieces: the opening, the body, and the closing. Now, if you're like 98% of the population, if someone asks you to do a presentation, a lot of people go directly to the slide deck first. They pull out the slide deck template, they start jotting things down in slides, and the last slide of the template is usually Q&A. What questions do you have for me? We would suggest that you put that Q&A between the body and the closing. Here's a reason why. If we leave it at the end, we end our session or our conversation or our presentation on somebody else's question. If we put it between the body and the closing, we then have the opportunity to make sure that we close on our own message, not someone else's question. So I like to see or think about these 3 sections as number 1, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to tell them. Number 2, I actually tell them. I give them the detail. I give them the information. And number 3, the closing, I remind them of what I just told them. It's a nice way to get the information in front of your people 3 times, which scientists and researchers say is the magic number for us to remember, in a way that helps them stick and remember. So very quickly, we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get to the actual outline document. But in your opening, you've got something that gets your audience's attention. It might just be a picture. It might be a quote. It might be a question. It might be a, hey, by show of hands, how many of you love change? You're not going to get a lot of hands, is my guess. But something to get people to pay attention. One of you said that effective communicators are not loud. So what if the person who is super loud normally comes into the meeting and they're whispering? There was a Corona commercial, I think, about a year ago, and the whole commercial was a whisper. And I remember physically leaning in thinking, is there something wrong with my television? They did it on purpose, and they got me leaning in. So just changing the volume of your voice, putting something in front of people to get them thinking and curious will get their attention. I'm going to state the purpose. Here's why we're here, folks, or here's why I'm writing you this email. And then I'm going to tell them the 3 most important things that I want them to remember, and I'm going to announce them very succinctly. So for the 3 points for our session today, it was styles, build, and purposeful. I might just give those 3 words, and then as I get into the body, I will talk about what each of those words means. I'll go into my data, my stories, my examples, etc. within the body. I'll ask for the questions, and then in the closing, I'll remind them, here's why I asked you, or here's why it's important to you. Here's the 3 things I want you to remember, and here's what I want you to do with it. So far, so good. And I'm going to give you an actual document to work with for this. So I'm looking for your, yep, we're good to go. Thumbs up, hands up, good. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the last piece. This is the way that we make our messages engaging. This is one way. We can put into the message what we call sharps. So you probably already do this. You may just not know that there's a word for it, but there are ways that we can insert stories and examples, humor. Be judicious and intentional about your humor. We all know that that can get away from us quickly. So if there's like something simple that you can throw in that will get a chuckle, that's great. We're not looking for belly laugh. We're just looking for upbeat, kind of smiled and then moved on kind of humor. Analogies, like the building of a house analogy that we used earlier. Maybe it's references or quotes, things that resonate with your audience or the people that are your participants. And then pictures. Very often you'll see a lot of stuff on a PowerPoint slide. And sometimes it's okay just to have one picture on the slide and tell the story behind the picture versus putting all the words on the picture or on the slide, forgive me. So you can add these in, sprinkle them in for engagement. If you never connect people to either their memory or their feeling about something, they don't typically engage. So by using stories, humor, references, quotes, that kind of thing, you typically can engage people more in the visual or the auditory and keep them more interested. So we have ways to make sure that we are appropriate. That's by using our blueprint. Useful is our structure or our outline. And then engaging is some of these sharps, and I'll give you some more purposeful engaging tools later. Are you feeling okay so far? Man, holy cow, the time is flying, you all. It's 3 o'clock already, my time. That's nutty. All right, well, we still have some really good stuff for you. Our next activity is a breakout. And here's what I'm going to suggest. I want you to think about something that you normally have to communicate. Maybe it was an email you sent yesterday. Maybe it was a direction that you had to give to someone just a couple of days ago, or maybe you have something coming up. And I'm going to ask you to have that in mind as you go through this next activity. And just know that there is not going to be enough time. You'll be happy to know we are ahead of time, so I'm going to be able to give you a little bit more. But here's what I ask. I want you to think through, what is my objective? Is it to inform or persuade? Who is it? And what is it that I want to inform or persuade them to do? So jot that down if you need to. So that's going to be your blueprint. Inform or persuade, who is it, and what is it that I want to inform or persuade them to do? That's your blueprint. Spend no more than 1 minute on that. Then you're going to consider, and we'll leave this up before we drop you into breakout rooms, because you're going to do some work on your own here for a moment. I want you to think about how you would start to drop the information in. And like I say, rest assured it will feel like you don't have nearly enough time, but we'll give you as much as we can. On the screen, if you were to deliver a message using this method, delivery, we're talking delivery, you would start at the very top and simply read or type your way through your message, top to bottom. That's how you would deliver it. As you're building, you may notice there are some red numbers on the, your left side of the screen. The numbers on the left-hand side of the screen, the red numbers, are the order in which you build your message. So you see number 1 is near the opening, and it's next to, I don't know if we can blow that up at all, Kathy. Can you all see that all right? I know from my old vision, it's a little small, but if we can blow it up, great. If not, I believe, Kyle, did you send, I'm hoping Kyle is still on the call with us. Did you send these documents to them this morning?
Yes, I did.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So you should have a communication outline. There are a couple of versions we gave you. We gave you some examples, but we also gave you one that was blank. So you would start with number 1. What's your purpose? And just type it in there or write it down. Number 2 is down in the bottom. You're just retyping or rewriting. It's the exact same statement. Number 3 is your body. How do you get to 4, 5, and 6? Here's a thought. You can just write down everything you want to convey in the message. And I'm going to turn my camera around for a minute so you can see how I do it. I actually have sticky notes on my wall that I put one item for every item that I want to share as part of my message. I put one item per sticky note, and they just fill a wall. And then I start to move them. That's why I use the sticky notes, because I can move them easily. And I start to group them. And usually I end up with 3 groups that somehow kind of relate to each other. If you're not certain what I mean, you're welcome to look at the example that we sent you. There is a St. Bernard Project example in there. Thank you to Kyle. And what you'll see is all of the things that are talked about within each point kind of relate to each other. And so don't feel like you have to get it right on the first go round, but you would put all of your information into, we hope, 3 somewhat congruent points. So somebody said earlier, effective communicators are congruent. So we want to have things that are categorized or grouped in similar topic. Then number 6, or 4, 5, and 6 are your body points. 7, get creative and think about, for those 3 buckets of information, what might I call bucket number 1? What might I call bucket number 2? What might I call bucket number 3? And give them a very short word. So if I was going to tell you everything about this class, I might say, you know what, we have to consider our audience, we have to consider our topic, and we have to consider our delivery. Those are my 3 topics, and I'll tell you all the stuff about audience, I'll tell you all the stuff about my topic, and I'll tell you all the stuff about delivery. Those 3 words might be what I choose for my 3 key points. You duplicate those in number 8. Number 9, what do you want them to do with the information? And 10 is usually the hardest because people start with it or try to start with it and they get stuck. So usually that will come to you. If it doesn't today, please don't let it worry you. We have a limited amount of time. All right, so here's my thought, Kathy. I want them to work independently just for a couple of minutes. Start getting your thoughts down. If you have this document open and you can start plugging some things in, great. Then I want to move you all into some breakouts and you can talk through it together with your breakout groups as far as, well, what would you put here or what would you put there? If you want to pull up that example, I encourage you to do that. So let's do this, Kathy. My clock says 3:05. We're doing really well on our time. So how about we take about 5 minutes on your own. Don't get stuck in any one place. Just move to the next if you can't quite figure it out. Let's do 5 minutes on their own, and then we'll put you in breakout rooms and you can talk through where you got to and what else you need some help with in that moment. Okay? What questions do you have for me? And you're welcome to unmute your line or chat it. Okay. Like I said, this works really well if you think about a message that you already delivered or something that you have coming up, like you know you need to let the group that's working on the project you're leading right now, you know you have to change their direction, maybe tomorrow at some point this week. How will you group your thoughts into this outline to help communicate that? You can't think about anything that you have coming up. Think about maybe an email or a communication you had recently and plug in based on that. All right. So I'll start a 5-minute timer on my end. I know Kathy will too. My clock says 3:07. At 3:12, we'll put you into the breakout rooms and just talk about any progress that you've made at that point, and you're welcome to look at those examples as well. Okay? All right. 5 minutes on your own, and then we'll put you into the breakout rooms. As you're thinking through it, if you do have any questions, please by all means speak up or throw it in the chat. I'm happy to help. You have about 1 more minute here, and then I do want to share something with the larger group, and then we'll have Kathy put you into your breakout rooms.
Amanda, really quickly, just to kind of clarify.
Yeah.
Okay, hi. For the body bucket, 4, 5, and 6, I'm realizing, is it safe to say like as you're defining each point, each subtopic, it's really kind of rounding out the why behind each point?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Yes. And as long as you're sharing relevant information around that point, I tend to throw in a here's why it's important to you or
Okay.
relevant statement. Yep. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. My clock says 3:12. Kathy, give me just about 30 seconds. I had someone in the chat ask if I would recommend the outline for email, or would it just be too long? I think you can do it really quickly and easily in email. I have used it for email. I've used it for a one-on-one with my boss. I used it to propose my involvement in a project with my boss's boss. I also have used it to structure a full day class. So it just depends on how much detail you're going to get into in each section. And if it's a full day class, you might see me break down the morning into the top 3 things for the morning and the top 3 things for the afternoon. So you don't necessarily have to break it down to every single topic, has to have an attention grabber, an object, not all that. But you can break it down into small groups, or you can keep it large, high level. So I've used it for all. I usually end up with a purpose or objective statement. If it's a new segment, I'll just say the reason this is valuable is, and that will be it, and we'll move on. But you can use this pretty much from soup to nuts. I've used it to create a 2-day class into an hour-long presentation. And now we're doing 3 days into an hour and a half. So you can use it for almost anything. All right, let's get them in their breakouts. Kathy, my